Hey, what, Shannon? How's it going?
Evening, evening.
I'm just waiting on the others to join. Welcome, everyone. Hey, right, Will. You right, John? You right, Lucy? Thanks very much for coming
Hey.
tonight, guys. Welcome, everyone, to the event tonight. Want to just welcome the panelists. They'll introduce themselves shortly. For those who are here and expecting the normal live stream on a Thursday evening, we are doing this event, which is why we did the live stream last night. So I hope that's not too inconvenient for you. We're hoping this is going to be a really interesting evening. I'm really excited, and we've been planning this for quite some months in terms of just getting the people together. You'd be astonished how much experience there is between the different people here in a very specific niche part of local democracy in terms of actually challenging local councils. And I guess just worth saying as a kind of a big picture thing, there's a lot of attention around homelessness and lobbying central government, and that's all good and well. But it seems to us that there's a real big gap in terms of charities, kind of lobbying issues locally with local councils. Given how much power local councils have, how much influence they have in terms of things as simple as building houses and what types of houses are being built and what services are being delivered and how statutory duties are being discharged. So, as I say, hopefully there's a real kind of opportunity here for people around the country just to, I guess, hear a little bit about what you can do within the sector and how any member of the public can actually do a great deal with relatively little work. So a few bits of housekeeping before we get on. So for those who haven't been on a live stream before, there's about a 30 or 40-second delay. So although we will be keeping an eye on the chat and seeing if there's any questions coming in that we can answer, we won't see them for 40 seconds or so. So don't get annoyed with us if we're not answering you. It just takes a little bit of time for us to see it. As always, please don't share personal data in the chat. If you've got questions about your own situation, put it in the third person, make it out as if it's about someone else, because there might be some situations which actually come up tonight, and I don't want people to feel they need to spew their guts and put personal data on there to get an answer. Other bits and pieces. So in terms of the agenda for this evening, we're going to kind of do a bit of a round robin first of all. So everyone's got a 10-minute slot or so, or up to 10 minutes. So Will's going to kick off, and then we're going to hear from Lucy, and then John, and then Shannon, and myself. And once we kind of do that, we'll then just kind of have a conversation and hopefully just pick up on things that are interesting and things that have come up in the conversation. And at that point, probably pick up on questions that are coming in from the live stream. So do keep an eye on that, and do feel free to raise questions. We are keeping a note of things that come in. Other bits and pieces you might need to know. We're going to be finished by 9 o'clock, if not before. So we'll try and keep on time just so everyone can get back and get to bed. Other than that, we might as well make a start. So I'm just going to double check we're all good to go on the live stream. I think we are. It's looking all right. Cool. Okay. So in fact, if we just do introductions first, if that's all right, guys, just to say a little bit about yourself, what perspective you've got on what we're talking about tonight, and I guess what you're going to be talking about in short when we get to your slot. So Shannon, can I pick on you first? Is that all right? Yeah, sorry, you're
That's
top left, so
grand.
you get picked on.
Hi everyone. So hopefully you recognise me from the live streams. But I'm co-founder of Homelessness Best Practice alongside Mike. The perspective I'm hoping to bring tonight is one of a lived experience perspective. So I've got lived experience of homelessness and what have you myself. But also I recently sort of did a little project and FOI'd most of the councils in the country. So I learned quite a lot from that. So yeah, that's me.
Nice one, thanks, Shannon. Next up, I've got John.
Hi everyone, I'm John Guinn. I'm a journalist. I spend my working day sitting in council meetings, listening to what's being said, or send an email saying, "Why is that then?" I'll be talking about how to ask questions later on.
Thanks, John. I actually meant to ask you in advance to see how many hours you think you've spent sitting in a council meeting in your career. So I'm guessing there's hundreds, if not thousands, right?
There's a lot, and they've all been thoroughly entertaining.
Yeah, there's no quite Jackie Weaver moments, but yeah, we've got some. I understand some bits that have come close. So yeah, cool. Thanks, John. Next up, I've got Will.
Hello, I'm Will. I'm here because I was part of a team that set up a charity called Full Fact, trying to promote honesty and accuracy in public life, and I ran Full Fact for 13 years. Before that, I was working for a blind, non-party political member of the House of Lords called Colin Lowe, who's a wonderful man. And as part of that, working with the RNIB team, we were doing a lot of work trying to get local councils to provide adequate support for blind people. So I haven't had a lot of experience working with local government, but I do remember that, and it was, a real learning curve, actually.
Thanks, Will. And I'm hoping that many of the principles that you kind of learned from your work with national politicians would apply equally within local settings. So it's great to have you here. And then last but not least, Lucy.
Hello, thanks, Mike. So yeah, I'm Lucy Bywater. I'm one of the councillors on Bedford Borough. We're 3 Green councillors. 2 of us were elected in 2019. I'm really passionate about people getting involved in local politics, but local campaigning, even if it's a single issue they really care about, and how to help them do that if they need help. Because I've only been a councillor since 2019, I know what it's like also from the other side of the fence to be sort of banging on the door trying to get people to listen to you. So for me, the big issues historically throughout my life have been human rights and environmental activism. So yeah, you don't have to be a councillor to make a difference.
Thanks, Lucy. And I guess as well, it's probably worth saying, although our focus tonight is about homelessness, pretty much everything we're going to say would apply to any other interest as well. So if you've got, any other kind of thing that you care about in your community, this is a really good way to kind of take action and get improvements locally and have influence. So thanks ever so much, guys. So if we want to start with Will, if that's okay, Will. So I've got some questions just to put to Will and see what comes up really. So if we start I guess to start with the obvious stuff, you kind of, you spent a lot of time fact checking and, as you say, kind of trying to get some honesty and integrity in public life. Like in 2024 in England, why is that a particularly key issue at the moment, would you say?
Well, it was 2010 when we launched. Way back when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. We've had a few since then, and it's been a key issue in a lot of different ways. But the most important way is that politics is important. It affects all of our lives, and it makes a difference whether the most important decisions are made with good information or bad information, and whether the people who are making decisions on our behalf are giving us honest explanations of what they think is going on and why they're doing the things they're doing and what effects they expect to have or not. And it's worth saying that Full Fact was actually set up by a cross-party group of trustees, serious people who've been at the top of politics, the top of journalism, and think they are important and deserve to be done well. It was also set up by a bunch of volunteers like me who had seen politics and been thoroughly, trying to find a broadcast-friendly phrase, become angry at the state of things. And it turns out that most of us are. In surveys done by the Committee for Standards in Public Life, honesty was the top concern people had. Telling the truth was the top concern people had about standards in public life. And they stopped doing those surveys, but I'm pretty sure if you did them now, the same thing would be true. So it's not that everybody's lying to you all the time. It's that keeping each other honest is about doing exactly what John said, sitting there and asking the question of, so why did you say that then? And that's what fact checkers do for a living.
Well, yeah, and I guess something I haven't said yet, actually. So if you work in homelessness sector, you might well be aware that a couple of weeks back they published the annual rough sleep account figures, and I thought it might be interesting just to refer to that, because I guess that's a really kind of key way in which statistics, or seemingly accurate statistics, will have a massive impact in terms of where funding gets allocated. It shapes public opinion, and that can be done in a good way or done in a kind of an unhelpful and kind of misleading way, or inadvertently misleading way. Now, in terms of kind of, I guess, general politics, you talk about the kind of everyone's key priority being honesty in politics. I guess talking as someone who's kind of outside politics completely and just kind of watching the news and stuff and seeing the last few years of politicians just being not just the obvious ones getting caught out lying, but just really kind of just I guess a lack of decency almost, whereas before, a couple of generations ago, people would just resign if they got caught doing something wrong. That now they're sort of sticking around. Why is today a different, are we different in this sense, or is it just a sense of that we kind of know more about politics now, so we see what's really going on, or are politicians kind of getting away with more than they used to, would you say?
I think it's a really interesting question. My reference point's only, I'm 40, right? So I don't have a reference point. I'm not sure there is a golden age. If there was, I wasn't working in politics. I wasn't doing accountability work when it was happening. When we had New Labour coming into power in 1997, back when I was a kid, everyone was worried about spin. I'm pretty sure Margaret Thatcher's spin doctor was reviled by lots of people as being a great big liar, etc., right? But I do think some things are different now. We've gone through 10 years or so of British politics that have been tumultuous, and they have been divisive, and we've had some very big decisions made that half the country disagrees with, at least. We've had a Conservative Party that can't decide who it wants to be its Prime Minister, and we've gone through a lot of Prime Ministers in the last few years. All of that disruption makes a difference to people's lives. The economic situation is pretty horrible and have real consequences. And all of that makes this more difficult. I think that ever since the Scottish referendum 2014, I've noticed British politics getting nastier to be part of. And I did a presentation a couple of years ago for editors, major newspapers in another country who were preparing for an election in their country. And I did the timeline. 4 general elections that I ran full fact through, 3 referendums, AV, Scottish independence, EU, 1 pandemic, the war with Ukraine, etc. We all remember that. What you might not remember is in that time, 2 MPs were murdered. Parliament was attacked on multiple occasions. MPs were attacked on multiple occasions. Politics has got more violent online, and I'd be really interested in Lucy's experience of this. I think being an elected representative is hard at the moment and frequently gets you to be subject to abuse. It's got more violent in real life in a genuinely murderous way. And I think doing accountability work now is actually more important than ever as a statement of democracy is important and we need it to be done well, not as a statement of us and them and you're scum and we're going to call you out for being scum, if you see what I mean. There's got to be a way of saying we believe in democracy, but we won't tolerate being lied to. And undoubtedly, we are being lied to some of the time. And yesterday's budget is a perfect example. There is no way the public finances can work the way people pretend. And we are not going to be able to have the public services and the tax levels at the same time that the government would like you to think. And in every election I've ever covered, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who are the big budget number crunchers, have said neither party is offering you an honest set of options. And that's not okay. And we need to challenge that. And we've lived through plenty of other examples of being promised the earth when the earth is not deliverable. It's absolutely not okay, but we've got to challenge it in a way that says, and we value this democracy and the value of our representatives. And, John will know, being a journalist is not easy now. And plenty of journalists have been threatened or worse over this period. Anybody who's on this call and is interested in standing up in a better public life is doing something hugely important in our democracy and actually shapes the way public life is for everybody. And that, I think, is an incredible thing that we can all do. And how we do it, I think, matters more than ever. Sorry, I know that's all a bit bleak, but, there's a really positive bit there that we're shaping.
Yeah, and I guess on that kind of point, in terms of part of that work of trying to keep things accurate, kind of keep that reporting accurate about complex issues, is there any kind of quick fix? Is it a case of having a rule where if an MP misleads the public or something, that there should be kind of harder, stricter kind of rules on what they need to do about correcting it and apologising, or is that something which doesn't really work in practice? I mean, have you got any kind of views on that?
We got the House of Commons to change our rules last year. I should say I don't work at Full Fact anymore, but I just left last year. The last big campaigning success we had was getting the House of Commons to change its rules. In the past, MPs who got something wrong couldn't correct the record even if they wanted to. We pointed this out. We said it was ridiculous. Pointed out that MPs actually had less of a system than tabloid newspapers, which I think is hard to argue back against. And the House of Commons did improve its rules, so any MP can now do a correction. The corrections are going to be easier to find, that kind of thing. That's progress. What they didn't do is insist that MPs who get things wrong must correct the record. Now, with newspapers, that does happen. First time we ever got a correction from all the press was on special educational needs back in 2011. And some of them did it overnight as soon as we pointed out, same day, whatever. The slowest took 9 months. After a long debate about where the correction would appear, going back and forth many times with their lawyers, got the correction wrong and had to print a second correction. That was the Daily Mail. A couple of years later, they started a corrections column. And now typically if Full Fact points out that they got something wrong, it will get corrected in hours or days. The Sun also started a corrections column, partly because the Leveson inquiry was going on, partly because of the work we were doing. I think that shows you something really powerful that I think is true in local government as well. If you care about something more than anyone else and you stick at a topic and you make it an issue and you frankly care more than the people who want to keep the status quo, then you have the opportunity to make a difference. And I think we did two things. We paid attention for longer than they could be bothered to pay attention to resisting us. And we worked out where in the system there were gaps that would make a difference. So we understood that the Press Complaints Commission wasn't working, but we used their system hundreds of times. And then when the Leveson inquiry came along, we were able to prove chapter and verse, this is not working. And with that inquiry going on, the press decided to change their corrections processes. So I think if you don't have lots of power and you don't have lots of money, the other big asset that you can have is time. And particularly the ability to sustain attention over time can make a really big difference.
And what was the largest number of team members you had with Full Fact to kind of get that sort of that shift? Was it a relatively small team?
So at the beginning, there were 3 of us. And that was 2010. 2011, I think we expanded. There were half a dozen of us by then. By the end, there were 50 of us. So we really grew over 13 years. But most of that was actually doing the fact checking. It was doing the day-to-day work of, is this correct? Where's your sources? Can you, correct it and all the rest of it? The actual talking to powerful institutions and changing it was a fraction of the work. Right? That's not a big part of the time. Having the proof that there is a problem, talking to them and them being there a month later, talking to them again, and them being there a month later, talking to them again. Like, it's not necessarily masses of time or masses of expertise or anything, but consistency matters, I think.
I think that's really kind of replicable within local government settings. I mean, you might have already answered this in one sense, but what would you say was the kind of the biggest win you had, or the win that you're most proud of during those years? I mean, as I say, you just mentioned the fact that you kind of got the correction system to be changed, but is there anything else that kind of stands out?
I mean, I do think it was remarkable that some of the most powerful newspapers in the country radically changed their willingness to correct the record when we were told by people who were real experts in the field that we would never, ever get a printed correction from the Daily Mail, not once. And that is a radical change. And, journalists have talked publicly about Full Fact having helped create a culture change. And I think it's real evidence that we were, I think, described as, you were fairly strident, they said. Strident, but I hope not rude, not aggressive, but, we're firm, right? We're standing for things, right? We're standing up for things, and you can stand up for things and be polite, but we were definitely standing up for things. But I think we also asked a question that nobody had asked in the same way before. And one of the things I realized when I was at RNIB doing the local government blindness work is even the biggest charities don't have the capacity to ask a question of every local authority in the country and make it stick. The only people who can do that are volunteers. It is absolutely classic, real citizenship. And by the way, the existence of John is a kind of minor miracle. Local democracy reporting is declining and declining. There's less funding for it. There are fewer journalists doing it. And it's a really scary situation where you don't have someone sitting in council meetings. You don't have people asking those questions. So it's really great that John is here. There aren't enough Johns in the country, if I can put it that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think John will talk about kind of where the funding comes from that role, and I may well kind of just talk about the background for that as well. That'd be cool. So, I mean, in one sense, you've kind of already answered my final question, really, in terms of just kind of how you get kind of actions in terms of that consistency, and I guess that kind of you need to know what you're talking about. There's no point kind of just running in there like a bull in a china shop and just kind of making a mess. You actually need to kind of have some well thought out things. I mean, we talked about the I mentioned the rough sleep account. Have you got any other tips in terms of where you've got an issue like that, which if you ask anyone in the homelessness sector, if you mention the rough sleep account, usually people get angry and say it's all a load of rubbish. It's the way they do it's terrible and all that rest of it, and they kind of they get angry about it, but nothing really happens. Have you got any kind of tips about how something like that, how we could push for improvements, or how we could make sure that data is actually used properly according to what it actually is rather than what it isn't?
Yeah, definitely. So for background, I've worked a lot with the UK Statistics Authority over the years. One of the things we did was get them to change their stance a bit on official statistics to say that official statisticians should take responsibility for how their statistics are used, not just what they say, and actually think about how they're being used and misunderstood. We had a press every 3 months publishing front page headlines that weren't true because of a kind of understandable misunderstanding of an official statistics release. And we went to ONS and we said, well, you should publish something saying this is wrong, you can't say this. And they said, oh no, that's not our job. So we went to their bosses, the UK Statistics Authority, which is set up by law to keep our statistics high integrity, high quality. And they said, no, actually, we agree with you. If everyone's misunderstanding our stuff every 3 months, that's our problem, not their problem. And they added one line to their statistical release and they stopped that set of misunderstandings. Those headlines went, because then we went back to the Press Complaints Commission and like forced the issue with the newspapers. But between those two things, that whole set of misreporting went. I've done a lot with Stats Authority. I did a communications review for them a few years ago. It's their job to be worried about this. And I agree with you, the homelessness statistics are a mess. They are completely misunderstood. And it doesn't help that most people's intuitive idea of what it means to be homeless is probably rough sleeping or something like that. It's not what the law thinks homelessness is. And I'm not an expert in homelessness at all, but it's not what I think you think homelessness is either. And it's not subtle, it's not nuanced and all the rest of it. And I think that if you could go to the Stats Authority and say, the way you are using these statistics, producing these statistics is causing real problems in the real world and making it harder for people to make good decisions, I think they would be interested in that. But the bigger point here is there's a whole chain of people with an interest in that decision, right? You've got a whole bunch of councils that care, and their representative body, the Local Government Association, cares. You've got the Select Committee in the House of Commons that cares about it, and a bunch of MPs who care about it. You've got the Statistics Authority going at it from a different direction, and you've got the Department of Local Government and whatever they're called this year. You've got all kinds of people who care, and therefore there's lots of ways in to make a difference to an issue like that. And I think everybody who produces official statistics, I haven't talked to them about this, so this is just me guessing, but I think they know that homelessness is one of those things that is really hard to measure by definition, right? It's kind of like asking the question of how many people are in the country without appropriate immigration approval, right? By definition, you can't measure that well. And so you're going to have to make some compromises, and then you're going to have to communicate those compromises well as to why did we measure this particular thing and what does it tell you? And just as importantly, what doesn't it tell you? If you can show them that they failed to do that, that either they're measuring the wrong thing or that they're not explaining it well, I think they might respond to that. And I think that's a conversation worth having.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's we might well pursue that. That'd be useful. Thanks, Will. Thanks ever so much for that. I think I certainly need to kind of process just some of that stuff, some of that in terms of working out, okay, so how do we change our strategy locally and to kind of take that into account? Because I think you're absolutely right in terms of that need just to keep, being the ones who are turning up and kind of raising the same issues and sticking with it, which is tiring, and it's, really busy. It's stuff is difficult to do, but it's really helpful. So yeah, thanks, Will. I'm sure we'll hear more from you in a little bit. Lucy, I'm wondering if I could just get you to explain just the rules about members of the public's interactions with councils, what they can and can't do, and essentially what different avenues are available, if that's okay. So over to you.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, I was thinking about this at the weekend, and there are actually more methods than you might immediately think of. So, I mean, number one, it sounds obvious, but you should know who your local councillor is, or where there's the problem that you've located, the councillor for that particular area. For example, so I'm a councillor for the town centre, so there are lots of issues that affect the town centre that might not interest a village councillor. But yeah, knowing who your councillor is, and you can find that out easily on the Bedford Borough website, or if you're from somewhere else, look on your local council website and you can get in touch with them. It's good to try and, sound them out, build a relationship with them about the particular issue that you're interested in. The other issue is knowing who the portfolio holder on the council is for that particular issue. So for example, housing in Bedford is Councillor Martin Morant Bryant. So just having a bit of an idea who she is and maybe getting in contact with her. So those two sort of key inroads to getting to know people. But the main thing is, as Will was saying, be active about asking questions. So you can ask questions of them, for example, about, you know, rough sleeper numbers or numbers of children in TA or current waiting lists on housing register, that kind of thing. But even more importantly, you can go to council meetings, as has been suggested. So Bedford Borough, we're unitary authority, so it's council responsible for every area of local government. So there are a lot of council meetings, and most of them you can go to, and you can find them on the calendar on the website. Different councils do vary a little bit about how much sort of accessibility they have to members of the public, but Bedford Borough is pretty good. Most of them are in person in Borough Hall, and they're usually evening, so 6:30 start, so it's sort of pretty time friendly for people after work. Some of them are virtual, but in any case, you can watch most of them if it's working. Sometimes there are technical hitches, but you can watch them on live stream, or you can watch a recording later. So I obviously can't be in several places at once, and I can't be on every committee. I'm not allowed to be on most of these committees. I'm allotted committees. So I often listen to the live stream when it suits me a few days later. So you can stop and start or while you're doing dinner, whatever. So it's a useful way to keep in touch and see with what's happening. And if you want to go and ask a question, in Bedford, you can do that easily. There's a dedicated email, right to speak at bedford.gov.uk, and you can email in a question with the name of the committee in the subject box. You can do that in advance, well, you need to do it in advance on the day of the committee at the latest. And then if you want to, you can go in person and ask that question. So you have to put it in advance, but you can ask it yourself. It's nice to take a bit of moral support if you feel like it the first time, but I think it's good to say it's not as daunting as people might think. Often these committees, they kind of sit up a little bit when they have a question from a member of the public, because it doesn't happen that often. So you're a bit of a novelty, and people are like, oh, so we should be paying attention here. We need to know what's going on. So it's a good thing to do in that respect. If they can't answer your question straight away, they can promise you a written answer, but they should normally give you some decent answer to start with. Next housing committee is on the 27th of March at 6:30 if anyone's interested in that, but I think you'll find certain people in this panel are already doing a great job at that. So Mike is often there asking questions and really holding the council to account excellently. But there are many other meetings you could also go to that affect housing, for example, children's services or adult services. These are all really relevant committees to housing and homelessness issues as well. So normally in Bedford, you put your question, there'll be a response, and then you can either ask a supplementary question, or you can make a comment. And you'll find that it's quite flexible, like I say, and there isn't a time limit. Planning committee is different. There's a very sort of legal sort of limit around that, and they literally time you to the second. But in most committees, it's really flexible. If you're feeling really brave, maybe you've started off in a particular committee asking a question. If you'd like to go to full council, that's really useful. It's often quite politically charged and much more party political generally than the other committees. And for that reason, your question is more likely to get sort of more response, and it can create a bit of a stir, and it'll generate a nice story for John potentially if it's like raising a news story. And again, it's the same system. You email the question in advance, and you'll find Democratic Services, who are the team who are facilitating these connections with the public and democracy. They're a really friendly bunch, and it's their job to help you, and they'll show you where to sit, they'll show you how the microphone works. So it's not as daunting as you might think. I mean, we had at full council a couple of weeks ago, we had a little girl and her mum. She was only about, I'd say, 10 or 11. She stood up and asked this brilliant question about speeding, and 20-mile-an-hour limits. And I think everyone was quite impressed. She didn't look at all daunted. And it was, yeah, she actually got a response that the parish council are going to look into it. So you have to start somewhere, start them young, I say, get them involved. Another really good thing you can do to engage is take part in consultations. I know people are skeptical about them, and often you're right to be skeptical, but still, if you're not part of it, then you've definitely not got any say. But if you do take part, there's a chance that some of your points will make it through to influence change. So it's definitely worth doing. So at the moment, for example, you might know we've got the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy consultation in Bedford, and that finishes at the 15th of March. So if you go on the council website, if you haven't already, you can have your say. And they really need input from people with lived experience or people working in the homelessness sector. So that's another good way to have your say. And of course, you can share it in your circles. People who care about this issue, you can share it. There are other consultations that also affect homelessness and housing. So, for example, the corporate strategy, when that's reviewed, you can take part in that to really highlight housing, homelessness. That's another opportunity. If you want to know, how do I know when these consultations are coming out? I mean, you might see them in the local paper or local social media, but you can also sign up to most councils' newsletter, and you certainly can in Bedford, and that will tell you some useful stuff generally about events that's happening, but also consultations. They always share those when they come. Probably another avenue you could try if you have a specific issue is you can start a petition, and you'll be glad to know in Bedford you only need 30 signatures from local residents to get your signature debated at full council. So the rules are on the council website, but it's really straightforward. You present it to the full council in advance, and then it will get debated, and you ideally, very ideally, would go along on the night it's debated to present it and get support of your own councillor for your ward to support you in that. And those are the main methods. I mean, the other methods are keeping talking, and obviously just pester people generally and make sure people are listening, because I mean, local democracy for me really has to be a two-way street. It shouldn't be well, in Bedford we have elections every 4 years, but obviously you shouldn't be waiting 4 years to have your say. You can have an influence and really highlight issues and get a sort of profile for knowing about those issues and being the expert. So when you come, people go, oh yeah, when Mike comes, this guy knows about this issue, Shannon knows about this issue, and they pay attention to you, and they less likely to fob you off because they know that you've done your research and you have experience of these issues. So yeah,
thanks Lucy. That's really helpful. I mean, I think so. Something I just kind of on that sort of note, I always kind of think councils they're spinning hundreds of plates, a lot of important plates, children's services, adult services budgets, and actually raising these kind of issues. So, I mean, we've done committees where we'll literally ask something as simple as how many children are in temporary accommodation today, as a way of kind of just kind of making councillors alert to it, because otherwise they might not realise it, because as I say, they've got too much stuff on. So I think that's been something we've kind of aimed to do. I think, we were talking before the meeting, just that different councils have slightly different rules, and there might be kind of more restrictive rules and stuff like that, but generally there'll be something along the same lines as Bedford. So we're kind of using Bedford as a microcosm to kind of say, well, it works in Bedford, it can work elsewhere. It's just about finding out the information on each website. Cool. Thanks so much, Lucy. Again, I'm sure we'll hear more from you in due course.
Thanks,
so
Mike.
Next up, we're going to talk to John, or John's going to talk to us. So we weren't quite sure, but essentially there were two really good things that I wanted John to talk about. So he's actually going to do both of them. So I'll leave it to you, John, if you want to put your share your screen or whatever, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. I'm going to try and talk and do something at the same time. Who knows? Can you all see that? Yep. Okay, good. Will's upset me a little bit, to be honest, because he was very difficult to follow, and he said he was a kid when New Labour came in, and I was a kid when it was the 3-day week, so I've shown my age there. When it comes to finding the information you want, you can try and get the answers yourself, or you can ask somebody to do it for you. I'm going to whiz through how to ask the questions yourself and then how to contact somebody like me. But before I do any of that, there's the boring bit. I'm assuming most of you publish blogs or have videos. It's very important that you know what you can and can't do when it comes to the law. So this book, it's not that expensive, but it is worth reading this to make sure that you're on the right side. I started in community radio. I felt the stuff I said was okay generally and sometimes funny. Decided I want to be a journalist for a career. Started doing a course, read this book, and I found out I said one or two things that could have got me in a lot of trouble. So it's very important. I have actually had somebody complain about what I've published when I had my own newspaper. Despite knowing I was trained in media law, knowing I was okay, despite having a media law consultant tell me I'm okay, it's still very scary. You don't know how it's going to go. It went to a tribunal because I was clever enough to be a member of an organisation where they have that, so it didn't go to court, and they dismissed it. But it's worth knowing what you can and can't do. And this relates to pictures as well. I was a travel agent 100 years ago, and the franchise put out a website for people to book holidays on, but they didn't have the rights for any of the pictures. So all the travel agents who had the website got bills for hundreds of pounds for images. The franchise just went, nah, and these travel agents had to pay for it. They had no choice. And I've actually charged the council for using one of my pictures without permission. I sent them a letter, sent them a bill, and they paid it very quickly because they knew they had no choice. They had to pay. I could have charged hundreds, but I just charged 80 because I was feeling good. And there's lots of books out there for people to read if you're doing an investigation. It can be challenging to keep track of what you're doing. This particular website does very cheap books for investigative journalists. These are about £7 each. It's all about getting the structure together because you want to be able to keep track of the information you're looking at, and you also want to be able to present it in a way that people can read it or want to read it. There's no point in having all the information if you just put something together that's a big mess. So it's worth probably getting a copy of these two books as well. So you need to clarify what you're hoping for. I interviewed Rishi Sunak a few months ago. I do like name dropping. And I spent a week studying him. I knew exactly how he was going to answer my first question. I based my whole interview around the first three words I knew he was going to say. He always says, well, I think, and I was going to be pedantic, and I was going to drill onto those three words, and I was going to bring down the whole Conservative by-election campaign because of these three words he always said. Although he didn't. He didn't say it. It came out really positive, and because I hadn't planned it well enough, I was then floundering about what questions I was going to ask. So I had to quickly come up with questions on the fly. He did contradict himself, I found out when I played the recording back, but because I hadn't prepared properly, hadn't really set myself a practical target, I missed it, so I couldn't report that. The Mickey taking, another councillor, they voted against a motion by a opposition member. They've played the man and not the motion, to be honest, and they spent a lot of time saying why it was a poor motion, why it couldn't be done, but they seem to have forgotten that 6 months previously they voted for the same things when it came out in a policy in their party. Maybe they felt people had forgotten that. I hadn't, so I made sure they knew. So my whole goal was just to take the mickey out of these pompous councillors for the stuff they said. We've already touched on know the format. The councils do change. My local council, I don't cover, but where I live, you get 3 minutes, then it's shut up and go away. We've already said in Bedford, you can ask a supplementary and you can have a statement. So before you put your question together, know what you can and can't do. I always believe you should be there in person. You can do it via email if you feel a bit shy, but I feel it's best if you're there. And know who you want to ask the question to and look them in the face when you ask it. I mean, don't be creepy, but let them know that you know they're responsible, and always look at them when they give the answer too as well. And always submit the question in advance. I think a week in advance is probably ideal. The councillor has the upper hand in this. They can just say, I'll have to give you a written response. So you want to make sure you make it as hard as possible for them to say, I'm going to give you a written response. So if you give them a week's notice, they really should be looking into the answer. If you show up at last minute and give them 5 minutes notice, they're just going to say, we'll tell you later. Do listen carefully to the answer that's given. I do this for a living, but every now and again I make a mistake. I think somebody said something, oh, that'd be a great news story. And then I play the recording back and they didn't say it. So you need to make sure you listen carefully. And whatever you do, don't react. Some councillors can be a bit aggressive in the way they respond to members of the public. Not all of them, but there's one or two, and they're easy to spot. And if you like sport, they're easy to wind up as well. But don't react, because if you cut the video at the end, you can see them getting angry, you can see them getting upset, and see you being there placid, just asking the questions. You come across a lot better. And it's just fun, to be perfectly honest. You do need to frame your questions effectively. Don't waffle like I do every now and again. Don't be technical, just make it plain English, as simple as possible, so they know exactly what you're after. Not only that, the people who are watching know what you're after. There's no point using jargon if nobody understands what you're talking about. Make it as simple as possible. And do be flexible if you get a chance to have a follow-up, because you don't know how you're going to get an answer sometimes. So have one or two ready just in case you get a really interesting answer, and you can then go for that. Closed-ended questions are a complete waste of time. They're just going to say yes or no. You want to avoid those. You want them to expand on it as much as possible. And you don't want to take sides or give your political colours. You don't want to say, why are you so rubbish at doing this? Ask, what are the problems of the council doing this and how are you addressing it? And then you get a longer answer with a bit of luck. But it's not about you. As I've already said, I tried to make the Sunak interview about me and I failed appallingly, so don't do that. Never tell anybody what you think of them. Don't start a row, although I have done that. I thought I was going to get thrown out of a coffee shop because I was getting aggressive with a by-election candidate who kept saying the same thing over and over again, which wasn't factually correct. It couldn't happen in a by-election. It could happen in a general election, but in a by-election it couldn't. And they kept returning to that point, and I kept saying that doesn't going to happen. And I have been in the public gallery at many councils, and people say, oh, they said that last time. That's because you asked the same question last time. They're not going to change the answer. You need to come at it a different way if you want a better or different answer. Just don't say the same thing month in, month out. There are more ways of getting answers instead of going to a public meeting. Approach your council press office. I've not come across any that won't speak to somebody who says they're a blogger. They're there to help the council promote themselves. So just explain who you are, explain what your question is, and maybe in a week's time you get an answer. As Lucy's already mentioned, speak to your ward councillor. I'm lucky, I've got a very good ward councillor. We're not the same politically, and she doesn't hold a grudge against me despite the fact I stood against her in 2019. She's a grown-up, she knows it was a competition, she won, we moved on. And she's very easy to approach. You can chat to the portfolio holder as well, as Lucy's already said. Loads of journalism books say, oh, go and speak to the relevant officer, but I've yet to meet an officer that wants to speak to anybody. They really don't. They're there to do whatever they want. They don't explain it. So you can try it, but it's unlikely it's going to happen. Or you can just find a councillor who's not in your ward who's interested and have a chat with them too. It's all about building relationships more than having the one or two questions in a council meeting. You want to be friendly, you want to have chats. You're going to get a lot of information you can't use, but it will help you to find ways of getting information you can use. So it's all about relationships. And Mike and Shannon are going to be talking about FOIs in a bit, so I'll give that a miss. But having said all that, you do all the work, you're not guaranteed you're going to get your answer. I spent ages putting this together to have a chat with Gove because I knew what he was going to say. I asked the question and he completely ignored it and said something else, even though I've done all that work. Well, the only thing I got out of it was somebody from the BBC saying, I wished I asked that question, but it achieved nothing, even though I put the work in. But even if you do put the work in, don't be afraid to use a hunch. With Sir Ed Davey, I was getting a load of stuff about how Lib Dems are the only party who can win. Win, win, win. It was getting really monotonous. And I remembered that he told me a few months previously that Lib Dems are going to be the Bedford Borough Mayor. So I said he was wrong there. And are you worried you're a jinx? And that threw him off his track. He had to think about it. He got a bit grumpy, but I got a great quote about Labour voters causing the fact of being to blame for a Conservative mayor. So for at the end of the chat, throw in a question, see what happens. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to tell you get lost, or whatever happened to Emily Maitlis, if you saw that in the social media yesterday. Don't give up, but do be careful. There's vexatious, if I said that right. That's where the council decides you're bothering them too much and they're just going to ignore you. It frustrates the person who keeps asking the questions. There's 1 or 2 incidents where people have sent thousands of emails and the council's just gone, no, that's it, we've had enough. I've been close to it and I might have got away with it because I'm a journalist, because sometimes councils don't answer questions and you keep going on and on and on. If you do it too much, they will refuse you. It won't let you in the council chamber. You won't be able to ask your meeting. I have seen somebody escorted out who was vexatious and he wouldn't shut up. Chat to your MP. I've got a new MP. He's very different to the one I had for many years before that, before she threw her dolls out. And he does speak to people. I don't know if he does anything yet, but he's there to speak to. So always have a chat. And of course, if you don't want to do it yourself, get a journalist to do it. We're quite happy to wind people up on somebody else's behalf. So the point of us is we're meant to hold people to account, make sure they're transparency and inform the public. The public participation bit was very important to me. I tried to interview every candidate for the local elections in May to make sure everybody knew who they were. I worked really hard on that. And the upshot was turnout went down. So I might have been to blame for that. Who knows? But I was trying to make sure everybody's involved. There's loads of people on social media, see the headlines, see the post, and they assume they know what the story's about and they comment on that. And they don't see what they're moaning about has actually been asked already. So don't just look at the headline. Read the story, read the news story and see what's said. And we're here to celebrate you as well. If you've got something that's worth celebrating, come to us. It builds the relationship. We get to know you. We know what you're about. You know what we're about. And we can build a relationship on that. And again, it's all about relationships. Do talk to us. If you see somebody scruffy in the corner of a council building who's not got a councillor badge in front of him, he's probably a journalist. We're all scruffy. Just have a chat. Find out what we do, tell us what you do. We're always looking for experts. We need experts to give our stories colour. We can't just say all the time that a council said this. We need somebody to explain why it's wrong. We can't do it ourselves. We don't do opinion pieces. We report what people have said. And I'm always looking for an expert to help me out on stories. But before you contact a journalist, do your homework. We are busy. When I had my own newspaper, I was getting over 200 emails a day. I wasn't reading them all. Loads got deleted. So do follow up, but don't follow up every day. I get PR people give me an email every day. Did you read it yesterday? No, delete. Do your research. Make sure the journalist you're looking at actually covers the stories that you're interested in. There's no point coming to me to say you've got a new widget. I don't do widgets. I do council fraud. If you've got something like that, come in with me. I'll talk to you. If you're representing another organisation, make sure you've got their permission to speak to a journalist. Make sure you've got the permission to share the information. And don't forget about confidentiality. I've got loads of information I can't share, and some of it I should never have had. But do be aware of that. And despite what you might think when you read some of the papers, we do have ethics to follow. So we won't just report blindly what you tell us. We will check it out first. I have done a handout on asking questions. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. Mike should be able to pass that on, hopefully. So if you want to speak to a journalist, we are all desperate for stories. I have no council meetings from the 1st of April until the 22nd of April. And in that 3 weeks, I've got to find 10 stories a week. So I'm more than keen to speak to anybody during those 3 weeks. Give us your opinion on something. If you see a social media post of a story, put your opinion in it. They do get read and we might come and speak to you in the future. But do be aware about the timing. There's no point speaking to a journalist who works in a newspaper when it's deadline day to get the paper to print. They're not going to talk to anybody. They're just going to get those pages finished and sent away. And we do get a lot of emails every day, so don't expect a quick response. Don't expect any response, but don't give up asking the question.
Cool, thanks,
Hopefully.
John.
We can get out of that now.
Yeah, should be hold on a sec, see if I can do it at my end. There we go. That should do it. Cool.
Yep.
Thanks, John. As I say, loads of stuff in there. I think it's just helpful just to hear it. I mean, in one sense, we live in a world where media is constantly interacting with us, and yet we don't really understand these basic bits and pieces about, you know, how what the kind of principles are and how we can access this stuff locally. I mean, do you have an idea of like how widespread people in similar roles to you are, John, in terms of, you know, how many councils around the country will have a John Guinn sitting in the corner looking scruffy?
There's about 150 of us. It's my particular role is a BBC project. I'm trying not to get too political about it, but all the local papers sacked all their journalists, and then they realised there's nobody covering council meetings. So the BBC stumped up some cash for these local papers to rehire journalists to sit in council meetings. There's about 150 of us. There's plenty of other journalists out there as well. If you go to the Independent Community News Network, there's what's hyperlocal publications. They might ask you to come on board and be one of their citizen journalists. They might have the time to do the investigations you need, so it's worth checking them out. They're all over the place. But you just search local democracy reporter and you'll come up with a list of where we are.
Cool, that's helpful. I mean, as I think in terms of replicating this kind of thing elsewhere, I think that'd be just a real key thing to kind of first kind of step is to see who's out there and if there's anyone covering that area. I mean, because do you technically cover 2 areas? Is that right, John?
I officially cover Bedford Borough, but I could do Central Beds when my colleague who covers Central Beds is too busy, because he also does Luton as well, and he gets a lot of meeting clashes. Bedford Borough are not the most active council in the world. There's plenty of downtime when it comes to meetings. I also cover Quangos, flooding, the Police and Crime Commissioner. So I try and get to wherever I can.
So I was thinking, because I think there's something like 400 local authorities in the whole of the country, if I understand it correctly. And so if you've got 150, you may be, if some are covering more than one, and I guess most areas will have someone of a similar role to yourself, which is, as I say, really useful kind of first step, I think, in terms of looking to raise these kind of things. So okay, cool. Thanks ever so much, John. As I say, I will circulate through Eventbrite, I think, those documents, so people have got them, and obviously people can rewatch that again as well, just to see the slides on the screen. So we're doing okay for time. We've got sort of half an hour or so left. Shannon's going to talk about FOIs and a bit of other bits pieces as well. I thought I'm just going to throw in some stuff. It's not really in any particular order, but I'm just going to kind of give people an example or some examples of what we found works well in Bedford, just to kind of see how simple it can sometimes be to raise an issue. So, I mean, as I say, literally, these are just kind of the way I came up with it at the top of my head. Something we kind of recognised a few years ago, and it's probably important to say that it was essential for us to kind of do what we've done because we were supporting individuals. So we'd see an issue come up with an individual and then kind of say, okay, there's a wider issue here. And a good example of that, for example, I was working with a family who the grandmother had a stroke, was basically confined to her bed. She lived in a high rise, and because of her disability, there was kind of no way to kind of exercise. She couldn't get out of the flats at all because the lift was often not working. And we, approached Bedford Borough Council, and actually they kind of, accepted there was a duty to house them, and yet there was nothing that was accessible for temporary accommodation. And so this kind of made me realise, okay, there's actually this big problem around, if you have a disability, particularly around mobility issues, you're going to get a second-rate service. And so that kind of led to a whole bunch of FOIs we did, one of which was asking the council literally in a housing committee, if you have someone who is using a wheelchair who needs to be housed in temporary accommodation, what do you do? And the answer was, we kind of scramble around and try and find something, but there's often a delay. We also looked at the average waiting times for people on the housing register who had disabilities and those who didn't, and there was a quite a significant discrepancy there as well for most household types, where if you had a disability, you'd have to wait longer. And so that was kind of one of the things we looked at. We also looked at training. What training did the housing officers have on the Equality Act? And the answer at the time was 0, and that led to them getting Doughty Street Chambers in to do training around that. So that was a really good result. And I haven't seen it actually in the flesh yet, but I'm told that Bedford Borough Council has now purchased or has identified to purchase a number of accessible temporary accommodation units. So you can kind of see how over a couple of years, this kind of thread has kind of resulted in some good work. And it's also kind of led into some other kind of further work around, making sure developers are actually sticking to their targets around building accessible houses. So again, it's kind of, these are all things which a local council controls and has control over. And I'm sure that Bedford's not the only one where there are those discrepancies. So that's one example. Another kind of real simple one I remember from back early in the day. So councils have a duty to provide temporary accommodation, but they doesn't have to be furnished. And one of the first individuals I worked with was a lady. She was heavily pregnant. She'd fled domestic abuse. And when I first met her in a temporary accommodation, she was sleeping on the kitchen tabletop because she had a pram and nothing else, basically. And so when I went to the kind of the council officers, I said, how about you guys get some beds in there? And they kind of laughed it off and said, we don't have a duty to do that. But when we raised it with the politicians in the town, they kind of thought, reasonable people, they thought, well, that's actually important. I think that someone made the comment, people in prison get a bed at least. And so, the people putting people in temporary accommodation without beds. And that led to beds being provided with temporary accommodation across the town. So there's no legal duty to do that, but they did it. So as I said, it's a good kind of example of where going to a housing officer directly or a senior officer directly didn't result in a good act or good action, but it was important to raise it politically, because I guess it's probably important to say that some issues will obviously have more political currency than others. So domestic abuse is probably a good one. I think most people understand that domestic abuse is a bad thing and that government should do something about it. So it's more of an open door than something which is more technical and kind of locked away within the legislation. Another kind of one which I think I mentioned already is just just raising the issue of kids in temporary accommodation. So something Will said, he kind of recognised that when you kind of, your biggest statistic that's published every year is about rough sleeping, it kind of creates this skewed perception that homelessness equals rough sleeping. Obviously it doesn't. It's far broader than that. So again, we've kind of, a few council meetings, we've asked questions around how many kids are in temporary accommodation. And in Bedford Borough, well, last time I asked, it was something like 500 or 600, I think, something like that. Can't remember the exact number. And then that kind of led on to questions, again, based on the individual casework, where we said, you've got kids in schools, they're being housed out of area or kind of on the other side of the borough, and that's clearly having a big impact on the kids' education. Can anything be done about that? And again, we didn't get anything hard and fast out of them, but certainly there were movements around, kind of recognising that kind of preference or that kind of priority to try and house people local to the kids' schools. So again, these are all kind of things which, they're not a magic answer or anything, but they're all little things that can be done with relatively little effort, in terms of actual hours to actually ask these questions. It's dead easy. So so I think, as I say, I could talk all day about it. Some other significant ones we've done, which are probably too technical to really go into without sounding really boring. But that's the kind of thing that we found has worked. And so me and Shannon are kind of part of a group that we're doing the same sort of thing elsewhere. And so a big bit recently, and Shannon, you're all right if I talk about the training thing we've done? Yeah. So we've kind of asked this question to councils all around the country, not all of them, but kind of a selection of what training do housing officers get about housing law? Because a big problem we've always come across is there's no qualification needed to be a housing officer. There's no professional body of housing officers, and they're making these massively important decisions about individual lives, and with often no knowledge about it at all. They're just using template letters and don't know what they're doing. So we asked a question around, what training do housing officers get about the Housing Act, about the Equality Act, about Data Protection Act, Care Act, all those sorts of things. And clearly there are councils, it's a big range between different councils. So some councils use decent providers and they kind of have a lot of training. A lot of other councils will have a training video which can be accessed if the staff member feels like it. And so that gives a platform for those other areas to say, well, okay, we've got the FOIs. Next question for those areas is take a question to the Housing Committee and ask a question about it. So the final thing I say, the example, was we asked the council what the average caseload was for housing officers in 2017 and then again in 2021 or something. And in that period, it basically more than doubled. So it was 20 or 25, it gone up to 55 to 60. And that kind of, we then asked the question again down the line. And I'm not saying this kind of single-handedly kind of got them to provide more funding, but that was a question I noticed got attention from a lot of the different councillors on the committee. And about 6 months ago, they kind of secured funding for an additional 24 positions. As I say, there was other things going on, so I'm not saying it was all us, but it's just, again, it's kind of raising that issue. Actually, whilst we often battle against some housing officers, they really liked us of doing that because they were stuck in a situation where they were inundated and couldn't actually do their job properly. It was a good question that kind of actually helped them out and helped everyone out as well. So that's all I want to say, really. As I say, I could talk more all day, but I'm sure we'll kind of get to a bit more when we start talking in a minute. But Shannon, do you want to talk about the what you've learned from FOIing every council in the country, pretty much, and kind of what you were actually aiming to do with that exercise? Is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good enough. Yeah.
I'll
cool.
start with that bit. I also want to sort of talk a little bit about why I love this stuff. But I'll start with like potentially the more boring bits first. Fascinating if you're me, but I'm aware that not everyone's into this. But yeah, so I sent off FOIs, the same FOI, to over 300 councils. I've got a very fancy spreadsheet with all the contact details, the date I've asked, and they have 20 working days to respond to you. Most councils, if they are providing information, won't respond within the time frame. If they don't have that information, then they're really quite quick to respond, actually. But what I did with the whole process is I sort of constructed my question, was like, right, want to be specific, try and not get to the 18-hour sort of time limit that you've got with an FOI. And I tested it. So I just tested it on sort of the first 5 councils to see what they'd respond with, what challenges I might be faced with, or if it was actually just quite straightforward. From there, I actually adapted it ever so slightly because I realised that, you know, part of it wasn't specific enough. And then I just worked my way through the alphabet. What I've realised is that a lot of the majority of local authorities who are providing an answer will come back to you and say that they can't do it for one reason or another. Now that might be time limit. It might say that they don't hold the information, where actually they do, but you have to sort of show them. And I've had great success actually so technically to challenge an FOI response, you have to go to an internal review. But what I've learned is you can really sort of like passively challenge that and say, oh, I just want to clarify. I read this on the ICO's website. My understanding was that this was the case. And then 9 times out of 10, you just really gently challenging that first sort of no gets them to provide the answer. The amount of responses I had back were like, yeah, we'll get it to you within 20 days. And you can sort of like, I read it in that tone. Maybe they're not emailing it in that tone, but it adds a bit of drama to it all. But I think, as expected, the much bigger councils, they take far longer than the 20 working days. You do have to chase it. There's been a couple of councils, because I've sort of finished it now, so the information doesn't go out of date, where I've chased it several times, raised complaints, and I still haven't had a response. There's definitely sort of handy tips to know around, actually it's on the council to help you sort of clarify your request if it is over the time limit. They need to give you advice on how to sort of like make it under the time limit if they can. And also if they're like, actually, we don't have that information, but we have all of this information. And there's been a handful of local authorities that have been really forthcoming and given me more information that I've asked for. And honestly, those interactions are just sort of like really reaffirming in democracy. But yeah, I think I want to use the data. So I asked a question around Now Medical, which is a not very nice company that councils sort of pay to make medical decisions on normally the most vulnerable. And the stats were shocking, but I'm also now thinking, actually, I've got loads of statistics about how long it takes a local authority to respond to an FOI. I've got loads of statistics around, you know, which ones use forms, which ones use emails, which ones will try and fob you off to begin with, which ones you have to go all the way through to internal review. And I think that's potentially going to be really useful, just around trying to make councils be a bit more accountable and transparent. The reason I love this stuff is it's that holding to account, and it feels like a really good way to get some power back when you've typically never had much power. I think the bonus as well of the FOI sort of laws is actually they're fairly simple. Sometimes the case law gets a bit tricky, but the ICO's website is fantastic. They're always great if you just need to pick up the phone to them. But it's that whole, it's so cringy, but I'm going to say it, that knowledge is power. And if you can start off by getting some of those FOIs and that knowledge, then you can start framing housing committee questions around it. But you're coming at a position where they know what you know, because I'm pretty sure most of the time, like the FOI that you send will be obviously to the FOI team, but they'll forward that on to the housing team. And if it's a red flag of a question, it wouldn't surprise me if that FOI then gets, put up the chain, and the head of housing is aware that someone has made this FOI. And then that all like drip feeds down to the relevant high people. But for me as well, I guess it's refocusing the local authorities' priorities. And with my lived experience, that's brilliant, because I can say, actually, this is what I care about, and sort of hammer that home. Obviously, a lot of mine's around homelessness. It's really difficult because I've asked lots and lots of questions in housing committees now. I've asked lots of FOIs. I still find the whole sort of process fairly inaccessible. And I wouldn't say, I'm a thick person or anything like that. Like, I think I'm quite good at picking up on new things, but it really concerns me that we've got, lots of different democratic processes that are really powerful, really empowering, and really useful, not just for myself, but for councillors, for, MPs, for whoever, the general public, that actually, I don't know how many people would know how to use them, or where to start looking. And, some councils' websites are fantastic, and they're like, here's the FOI process. This is what you need to do. This is what we need to do. And it's perfect. But some local authorities, I'm not sure how they get away with their websites, and the lack of sort of transparency on that. What I would say is it's an absolute sort of luxury to even be able to do this sort of work. And I would urge people, if you've, going through homelessness or whatever, I know a lot of people watch our live streams, are going through that once you're settled, if you've had something crop up in one of your cases, you don't have to make it about yourself. You can ask an FOI that's generally about the issue. You can take that to the housing committee generally. And like Lucy said, it makes everyone stand up a little bit. I remember it was a couple of years ago, I think, but the old portfolio holder sort of like, oh, lots of questions tonight. And I thought, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want every meeting for them to go, oh, because that oh doesn't actually mean like yay. It means and I'm not confrontational. I do find it stressful sort of asking those questions. So I've never asked one in person. I think because I'd get frustrated by the answers and I wouldn't be able to not react. I know myself well enough to know that. But I also the last thing I would say is try and get people around you that are also interested in this, whether that's just a couple of people. Whether it's through FOIs or through housing committees, I've typically found that people in power have the ability to sort of gaslight you. The amount of times I've had sort of responses back where they say, no, that's not the case. And then it's gone through to complaints, and the legal team have said, no, it is the case. And that's actually quite emotionally draining when you're doing a lot of it. So having someone like Mike, I'll ring him up and be like, can I just check this is absolutely right? Can I check that I'm not being vexatious? I was terrified of that. But yeah, so I just think that's all I'll sort of say on that. I've got also, as a heads up, I have got questions for everyone else on the panel, if that's okay, Mike, in a bit.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I just wanted to it might be worth just kind of talking a little bit about the home. So Lucy mentioned the homelessness strategy earlier. So Bedford's going to go, and every local authority should have a homelessness strategy every 5 years. Bedford hasn't had one for 3 years, I think, technically, and it's something we've raised before. And interesting, just another thing which kind of on the back of this. So another thing that I know John Allen at Just Us has been really kind of hammering is the council having a domestic abuse policy, because legally the council should have had one for 12 years and it's not, and it's always kind of bumped it off, and we've been raising that, and I understand that now he's got confirmation that they will actually put a domestic abuse policy in place, and that might seem like a really boring thing, but that actually means you've got a set of kind of more kind of flexible guidelines that you can then kind of expect from housing officers to be following. But I just think with the homelessness strategy, so in my opinion, the Bedford Borough Council has not done a good job with kind of getting the experiences of people who've been homeless, talking about the homelessness strategy. So the questions themselves, I mean, this is what we're going to be looking at. So earlier this week, Shannon and myself and John from Just Us, we kind of met up with some people who've been homeless. We had about a group of about, I think it was about eight or nine of us there, and kind of, you know, if you look at the questions that the homelessness strategy was asking, you think, well, who cares about these questions? This isn't the right questions. It's not the right starting point. So we basically came up with a bunch of questions, you know, that will hopefully be kind of more enlightening from people who've been through the sector. And essentially, you know, I found it to be a very useful session, a very uplifting session actually, because what was clear was that everyone who came, when we asked, you know, would you be interested in doing more of this stuff, they were all like, yeah, we really want to be, yeah, we want to do this, want to feed in. And yet the council was kind of, yeah, the extent to which they've got lived experience feedback is putting a few posts out saying it'd be nice if people lived experience did it, but it's on a website. It's kind of pretty much inaccessible. It's very difficult to read. So I think that's something we'll be pushing for in Bedford. Is, you know, to say actually your strategies that concern people of different groups need to be far better at actually engaging people and having that input from them. Because it was the stuff people were saying was really good. You know, a lot of it was kind of quite hard hitting, but also constructive. So it wasn't like it was all just people whinging. So I think that's something which, you know, as I say, I think we'll be taking forward in Bedford. But any area you'll have a local strategies about housing. You have a housing strategy. You have a street drinking strategy probably, and all these different strategies that are actually relevant. And it's absolutely crucial that you're actually using those opportunities to kind of to feed back, as Lucy said earlier. So thanks everyone. We've kind of done our slots. We've got sort of 15-20 minutes left to kind of talk a bit further. So I mean, Shannon, do you want to start with your questions you've got for everyone, because I think that might be a good way to commence this section.
I'll do a little round robin of everyone. It's because, like, I think what everyone said was really interesting. Will, I can start with you. Basically, it's around like the accessibility of transparency, essentially. And I flipped back and forth between wanting the councils, wanting people in power to just be more simple. At the same time, I love reading case law and whatnot, and I'm aware that there's massive benefits in the minutiae. And I just wanted to know, yeah, I guess simple fact checking versus detailed fact checking. What do you think is better? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm a nerd. You know, used to work in Parliament, detailed legislation, etc., etc. I'm happy in that place. But I also think it's really important you can turn up at your local council or your local MP's office and say, I have a problem. And frankly, it's your job to deal with the details. So, like, tell me what you can do about my problem. And either version of that is democracy working well, I think. I do think if you're going to tackle hard issues, you need someone on your side who does care about the details and minutiae, how the system works, who can think creatively about who in the system might get interested, like the Statistics Authority, who most people have never heard of. But if you kind of get aware of who all the players are in a system, sometimes you find ways of working in a system, or if you understand the rules of the system, you find ways of working in a system that you wouldn't see in other places. But at the end of the day, we elect people to represent us, and it's okay and good to go to our representatives and say, I've got a problem, you're there to represent me, how can you help? And that's got to be enough as well. While I've got the mic, I just wanted to give a name to something, because I noticed several people use the same technique, which in Parliament we call a question funnel, where you start by asking a big broad question or a simple factual question, and then in the next question you say, given your answer to the previous question, what do you mean by this? And it's a really good way of avoiding being vexatious, avoiding bugging anybody with loads of questions, but gradually narrowing them down to a point where, well, given you've given me this number, clearly there's a problem. What are you doing about it, etc., etc. And I think almost everybody talks about using that technique at some stage, so I thought giving it a name might be quite useful.
Nice one, thanks, Will. Shannon, do you want to keep going with your stream of questions?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I'm trying to just like digest that. yeah, I think there's potentially more that people could do around making councillors give simple details, but still, like you say, the details down to them. Actually, can you put it in plain English? Yeah, thank you. So,
Oh,
Lucy.
sorry. One other
Go on.
plug while I'm at it. You were great on the FOI stuff, and by the way, it's been really inspiring listening to the way you two are getting change. In such an important topic. Another group of people who will help you have a campaign for freedom of information, who are the essentially handful of people, and I do mean a handful, who spent 30 years getting the Freedom of Information Act that Shannon has just been doing such good work with. So I talk about sticking with a topic long after everyone else is bored, but they know inside out, read all the case law, etc. If you ever need help with a tricky FOI, they're there to help.
I've
That's
just Googled
amazing.
and they
Thank
look
you.
interesting. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks, Will. That's really helpful.
Written it down. So my question for Lucy is, and this is a bit more like a general interest, I guess, because you talked about going to your local councillor. When it comes to the committees, do the councillors choose what committees they can be on? Because I know you said like, oh, I can't be on every committee. And I'm wondering, does it mean that, the councillors in that room are the ones invested in that issue? Or like, so how would you, if I go to the housing committee, but actually there's one councillor who's like really into homelessness, but they're not on that committee, like how would I find that out necessarily, if that makes sense?
That's a really good question. So yes, I mean, I'm from a small party. We're only 3 councillors out of 46 or 47 on the council. So the way committees seats are allotted is proportionate to the size of the parties. And because we're a small party, we say, please, can we be on this committee? And they go, no, you can't. And then we just have to pester them, and then they might give us one of our 5 choices. So, for example, we were pleased that Ben Foley, my fellow councillor, he is on housing this time, but we didn't have anyone on housing before. So, I mean, I think counts in terms of having someone with a passion for that subject. I mean, it varies. I don't want to speak ill of other councillors, but I think some are generally much more motivated about everything than some other councillors. That's all I can say. And there are some good people on housing. I mean, I'll mention Dean Crofts, for example, from Lib Dems, another party who is passionate about that, and he knows his stuff as well. On other committees, I think there's the knowledge and the expertise, I think, varies a lot, to be honest with you, in different areas. But yeah, generally, councillors do get a bit of a choice about which committees they're on. But when you're smaller, or if you're independent councillor, you get much less choice, because the bigger parties are saying, yeah, we want a seat on there, we want a seat on there, and they get to sort of put their hands up and get their seats. But yes, if you can identify someone on that committee who you can tell knows their stuff and is challenging and is also backing up the questioners who come, because I think it's good when you go and ask questions, and that councillor who goes, yeah, this member of the public's got a really good point. Why aren't we doing this? We should be listening to them. How can we take this up further? Can we take this out of the meeting and talk about it and see what we can do? That is really important, and that's part of the value, obviously, of going to ask those questions. But sometimes I see members of the public ask really good questions and no councillor stands up for them or shows much interest. And I'm watching on the live stream thinking, this is so frustrating, because that person stuck their head above the parapet and they've gone along, and they might have felt quite terrified the first time they do it, and they need someone to go, yeah, good question. So yeah.
Yes, so like, could you, because John sort of said about like potentially bringing a friend with you for more, I think it was John, it might have been yourself actually. Could you ask your local MP to go with you to a committee and be like, look, because you're one of them, not making it one, but you understand how this all works. Can you like give me that support, or would that be sort of out of the remit of a councillor?
Yes, because your MP they are not going to interfere in council business. Plus, they're probably even more busy than councillors. But yeah, taking a friend. I mean, it could be your brother or sister or your friend. It could be, someone who also cares. I think that's valuable. Quite often, people bring someone with them. Just because sometimes if you're nervous, you forget the microphone, or you realize that you're not speaking very loudly and your friend can just go, just speak up a bit. You haven't turned the microphone on. Just little things like that. But also afterwards to sort of decompress, to vent to someone in the corridor and say, they didn't answer my question. And how can I get them to, it's a bit lonely to trudge home on your own if you've had a frustrating time. So yeah, I mean, it's always good with any of these things to share with your MP as well, even if it's council business and not parliamentary. I think it's good to keep the pressure on them as well, whatever the issue is.
I mean, I'd resonate with that totally, Lucy. So the last question I asked a few weeks ago was a fairly hard hitting one, and I knew how badly it was going to get taken. So I rang up John and said, John Allen said, yeah, can you come with me, basically, because I was like terrified. I've got a question. Sorry, Shannon, I'm going to ask a question quickly, just kind of on the back of this. I guess this is all to all three of you, Will, John, and Lucy. Is there any? I mean, I've heard people talk about trying to ask questions that kind of like divide the different parties that are in a committee and kind of play one against the other. I've not seen that as. I don't know how useful that is, but I mean, I have noticed with the housing committee, there's obviously different parties there, and there did seem to be a bit of tension. Is there any kind of time for, or any kind of place for asking a question that specifically will give one party a bit of a kind of a platform to bang a drum that you might see similar kind of views to, or something like that? Or is it just best to stay out of that and just keep it all simple and keep it straightforward?
Is that for me?
That's yeah. Well, yeah. You, John, and Will, to be honest, because I think you probably all have a view on that one.
Well, I would say in full council, things do get quite heated between. It's much more party political, so there is mileage to be had if you can ask a question that will make the executive look weak, for example, or make them look mean, for want of a better word, and then you can get the other parties to sort of gang up on them and help strengthen your case. And then, like I say, John can write up a good story about it and get more attention from it, something that's not being done properly. Generally, I wouldn't try and stoke party political divisions, because you really want everyone in the room to go, hell yeah, this guy's asking a really important question. Why aren't we doing something? The goal really should be to make it seem like a common sense thing. This is the way I try and ask questions anyway. I'm just like, this should be obvious, shouldn't it, guys? So that everyone should be on board. And if they're not, you should be saying, why doesn't this person agree? This is about basic humanity. It's about basic decency, doing the right thing. So yeah, generally I would say not sort of stoking division, because there's quite a lot of that anyway, really. But yeah, it depends very much on the issue.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, as I say, I mean, it just the one a couple of weeks ago, like clearly there was the kind of beginnings of one councillor kind of raising another issue, and so I just thought, I don't know, as I say, is it ever a good idea to do that? But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, as I say, if it's an effective strategy in other kind of situations. But yeah.
If I can take the bait very briefly, the other thing I'd think about is how you're seen. Because I think once you're seen as lined up with one particular political party, it's very hard to get back through the door to being seen as people who are just interested in an issue. And so if you think about how the decision is going to be made and the motivations of the people making the decision, as Lucy said, sometimes you can get a win by jumping in with one party who controls the council or might win it next time, and so on. But if you want to do a sustained push on an issue over time, being seen as attached to one political side or another is a choice and kind of a sacrifice. So all my work has been non-partisan, and that's been a necessary part of the kind of work I've done. Party political campaigning is an important part of democracy, but all those passions, all the kind of heat attached to it and so on, if you get involved in that, you're making a choice not to be kind of able to talk to all parties in the same way.
And have you got any tips, Will, on that? Because obviously there are going to be certain issues that come up in the political discourse that you think, well, do you know what, I really, really agree with this party and don't agree with that party. Have you got any kind of tips for being disciplined about how to kind of remain impartial and kind of be, genuinely be impartial?
Yeah, a rule above all is play the ball, not the player. So talk about the issue, don't talk about the people, don't talk about the party. And actually, a political party will be fine if you continue saying the thing you've always been saying, which is homelessness is important and you should be doing X, Y, and Z differently. And you leave out the implicit and your political party is doing a rubbish job of this, or that political party doing a better job of it, whatever. If you stick to the bit which is kind of squarely your thing, you're not going to make political enemies, as long as you don't kind of do it in a really kind of bad timing, like the day before the election, you suddenly come out with something that can only be read one way or something like that. But yeah, play the ball, not the player, I think. And then I would just say about criticism. I think criticism is really interesting. I spent a lot of time criticizing people over the years. And there's a really useful distinction between criticizing a particular thing somebody said, criticizing a particular thing somebody's done, and criticizing somebody as a person or as a party. And I think being really clear, John was talking about knowing what you want to achieve by something you're doing, being really clear on, do I have a problem with this letter I got or this decision they made? Do I have a problem with a pattern of behavior where they keep doing something wrong or something's underfunded or whatever? Or do I have a problem with a particular decision maker? And only very, very, very rarely did we ever go, we have a problem with a decision maker. And I think you get a lot of opportunity to take the heat out of things by sticking on the specific decisions, specific patterns of behavior. The moment you go after the player, that's when you add heat to the situation, which again is something that's legitimate to do in the right situation, but make it a deliberate choice and recognize the cost of adding heat.
Cool. Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've got 5 minutes left, and I realise I've just interrupted Shannon's question to John. So I don't know, Shannon, do you want to ask that question? Then we'll just kind of do a final wrap up.
I think John just wanted to come in.
Oh, sorry, John. Yeah, you
first.
go for it. Yes, I missed that.
Yeah, well, I stood as an independent councillor in 2019 when I had my own publication. I didn't want to be a journalist who's seen to criticise and not actually tried doing it themselves. And it did cause me issues with the party that won. I was automatically seen as being against them, even though I wasn't. I was just doing my job after the election. So it was fun to do, but professionally it wasn't a good thing to do. And yeah, don't try and pick sides in a committee room, because then it becomes personality clashes and you get forgotten about. But yeah, I'd recommend just sticking away from parties.
Yeah, cool.
So my question to you, John, and it's also, I guess, just to make everyone watching this aware that when you ask a question in a housing committee, that can be picked up on a journalist and they might run with it. And that then might hit social media. I had a question a while back. On one sort of media outlet got some really nice comments, and on another media outlet it got some really nasty, horrible comments. I guess my question, John, obviously that's not your responsibility, but is there sort of like, is that better to have a sort of like a question that you can write about that is a bit more inflammatory for people, or is it better to have a bit more of a boring question? I mean, now I've asked the question, I feel like I know your answer, but you see where I'm coming from with this.
I'm more than happy with boring questions, but my editor isn't. So I was looking at a council agenda item from yesterday and it really interested me, but apparently wouldn't interest any of my readers. The whole point is to get people to read it, and the question needs to have enough content. The minimum I can write is 550 words, so it needs to be something where I can get 350 words at a minimum out of. And I have not covered stuff in the past because I could predict what would happen on social media. I knew somebody would get a hard time if I covered it, but they had a go at me for not covering it. So I covered it, and exactly what I said would happen happened. But they insisted. So lots of people look at I don't have anything to do with social media. I just write the copy. The social media is by the publishing partners who use my stuff. I have no control over what headline they use or how they position it. And lots of people just look at how it's positioned and not what was said, and they make a comment on that. And there's loads of people who seem to know how to run the council, but don't do anything about it themselves. And it's difficult, but look at the positive ones and just ignore the negative ones, because on the whole, the negative people don't know what they're talking about. They just want to share their ignorance. But yeah, if you want a question covered by me, it needs to be fairly substantial so I can get enough words out of it. That makes sense.
That's good to know.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. So I haven't done a good job with timekeeping it, guys. We've already hit 9 o'clock, and I kind of crept up on me very quickly there. I just wonder if people just got final comments they just want to say. I mean, again, yeah, the aim of tonight is just to kind of just tell people out there that this can be done in their area, and I guess a few bits that kind of hopefully just help, kind of give some principles of how they can proceed. I just, if we should go around and kind of just a final thought, if I'm not putting people on the spot there. So, Will, you're top left at the moment for me. Have you got anything you just kind of want to say as wrapping up?
It's an election year. You're going to get more than usual numbers of politicians and canvassers knocking on your door, and they will have questions they want to ask you, but it is your chance to tell them what you want from them. And believe me, they are making notes of what issues people talk about on the doorstep. So if nothing else, if you're here, you obviously care about homelessness. Make sure you mention it if someone knocks on your door, or whatever else it is that you want them to be thinking about.
Well, that's great. Yeah, really good point in terms of just increased kind of political activity, I guess, this year, and I guess possibilities of I guess the kind of the agenda being set for the next 5 years or whatever. So yeah, thank you very much, Will. John, any final thoughts?
It sounds very like I'm not taking this seriously, but treat it as a game. Don't take it personally. If for those who played Sunday football, you kick head out of each other for 90 minutes and then you're down the pub. This is how you should look at it. You shouldn't take anything to heart, whatever people say to you. If you don't get the answer you wanted, just think, oh, I lost that game. Go back, look over it, and have another go. So never take it personally. It's just a game, and you're going to get better the more you do it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, John. Nice one. Lucy?
Yeah, first I'd echo what Will says. General election years give you more voice. I mean, you're going to hear a lot of voices, but you do get more voice to say what you care about. But also all year round and between elections, it's really important that people have influence, and it's surprising the influence you can have by asking a question, by just getting people to sit up a bit, by reporters following up some of those stories. And so don't think you do have an influence just because you haven't chosen to stand as an elected representative. You can still have an influence and actually get some things to change, as you've done, Mike, and Just Us, and Shannon and John. You really have, and that's quantifiable change. So yeah, the more people who do this, the better.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks, Lucy. And then Shannon?
Yeah, just a plea that anyone can do this. Not just, specific political people, but if you are a worker in the sector who is moaning about the state of things, you can do this. You can do it to your neighbouring authority if it's going to cause issues for your employment. If you're someone who's going through it and got lived experience, you can do this. If you're literally anyone, a member of the public, which includes everyone, you can do this. So I would just urge you to try, I guess, because yeah, the positivity that comes out of it can be amazing.
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks, guys. I mean, I just want to say my final thought is that, in one sense, voting once every 4 or 5 years is nothing in comparison to asking a question at a housing committee. I mean, statistically speaking, your vote doesn't count. It probably won't. Not saying you shouldn't vote, obviously, but the ability that we've got within our democracy to raise issues locally and be political in a non-partisan sense and not being politicians is really quite remarkable. And it's, of all the things going on in our country right now, it is something I like being British for. We've got a really good set of systems which can be used and kind of can enable us to have a better society. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone for coming tonight, and just for the time it's kind of taken out of your schedules. I've really found it really useful. I'm hoping it'll be on the YouTube channel now, just for people to see and kind of pick apart and kind of hopefully inspire to do things elsewhere. So we'll call it an end. Sorry for overrunning, and as I say, hopefully people out there, this has been useful and will give you a bit of food for thought going forward in your area and identify